to ROBOTECH, the novels panel. All right, so who was here last night? Who wasn't here last night for the comics panel? Okay, all right, so a few of us are ready to, all right, that's cool. Yeah, so anyway, I started off by just thanking Tom and Dennis Bateman for inviting me and many others for the ROBOTECH portion of this convention, Anime LA. So yeah, without them, none of us would be here, really. So, shout out to them. And let's get this show on the road. So I will, start off the introductions. That's short and sweet, I think, and hold me to it. So I'm Brian Chu. I've had an online presence for quite a while, a couple of decades. I've met Bill Spangler a long time ago in person because we're local to each other, and I started communicating with Jim Lucino mid to late 90s through email. Online handle is Mecca 8, and I stopped myself right there. So our special guest, Jim Lucino right here. It's right here. If you'd like to say anything.
Well, I know these guys from yesterday. I'm not going to say anything. Yeah, I'm a novelist. I really cut my teeth on ROBOTECH. I had written one adventure novel before that, but great learning experience for me. I've since ROBOTECH, I went on to do other novelizations. I worked for 15 years in the Star Wars franchise, contributed a lot of books to that saga. But that's it. We'll get into all kinds of stuff.
I'm Bill Spangler. My contributions to ROBOTECH have primarily been through comics, but I'm sort of an indirect contributor to the novels as well, and we will talk about that.
All right. So when it comes to the novels, Jim, you were a longtime friend to Brian Daley.
Yes.
Very, very accomplished novelist who had written, besides his own books, the very first Han Solo novels, the historic, Han Solo Adventures collection, or didn't start off with that title, but became known as that. So, how did you meet Brian, and how did both of you perhaps got involved with ROBOTECH?
Okay, the Jack McKinney origin story. Yeah, Brian and I met in the mid-'70s. He was working on his first science fiction novel called Doomfarers of Coromand, and I was working on that adventure novel I just mentioned about drug smuggling in South America. And he, with Doomfarers, really led to a great career for him. He followed that up with a sequel, then he was working for Lucasfilm and did the Han Solo trilogy. He novelized Tron, and we stayed close friends through all of that. Then he got a job writing for an animated series called Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers. Anybody familiar with that? Short-lived animation, sort of cowboys in space. And he talked me into submitting scripts, which I did. And in the end, I submitted 7 scripts. Brian did 7 scripts. And the series might have gone somewhere if it had a toy line behind it, but it never did, so it collapsed. But on the heels of that, there was a woman at Valentine Books who had just gotten the license to adapt ROBOTECH as novels. And she thought that Brian and I would make a good team to adapt those novels. And that's really the start of it. Brian and I were flown out to California to meet with Carl Mason, Harmony Gold. I think it was on Sunset Strip, Arkansas?
Yes.
Near Tower
Yes.
Records, near Tower Records, right? We had a great time there. We returned to Maryland, where we were living with all of the episodes on videotape and a lot of other resource material, and started figuring out how we were going to break down these 3 series into 12 novels, because Valentine's plan was to publish a novel a month, if possible. Which means, like I said yesterday, we were on a very, very tight writing schedule. But Brian, because he was working in Star Wars and he had his own material, he wanted a pseudonym. And at that time I was working as a carpenter as well as writing. And I had a toolbox that was handed down from my father, from a friend of his. And on the toolbox there was stenciled the name Jack McKinney. And I said, Brian, I think we found our pseudonym. So that's what stuck. And that's it. Then we started breaking down these novels, and I was writing one while Brian was writing one, and we carried on from there.
All right. Yeah, that's, the novels, they came forth with a real genuine, I think, respect for the animation. I mean, yes, there have been plenty of arguments, debates about, sticking true to the material and all of that. But there is more than one way to do something, to adapt something in different opinions and so forth. And had just really appreciated what you and Brian have done with that, with that work.
Yeah, we didn't know, in the beginning, we were trying to figure out who is our audience? Because who's watching the show? And who's going to want to read novels? I mean, are we writing for 10-year-olds or are we writing for teenagers? But Carl Masek from the very beginning said, don't write down, like expand it, make it big, write them just like science fiction novels, which is what we ended up doing. And I remember I was very uncertain about Robotech in the beginning, and I saw one episode where was, I guess, the first episode where Lisa's accusing Claudia of, I don't know, frolicking with Roy Hunter at night. And I thought, well, this isn't a normal cartoon. This is something else, So I said, okay, we don't have to write down on this one. We can get deep. But I have to say that in the very beginning, I was very, I lacked a lot of confidence because I hadn't written science fiction. And Brian had these novels behind him, the Tron novelization, the Star Wars books. So when I first started writing, I was studying Brian as much as I was studying Robotech. And Brian served with the cavalry in Vietnam, and so he had a real good understanding of artillery, and he transferred that over to Mecca. And so for me, it was about getting a vocabulary for science fiction. That was the hardest. I didn't have that vocabulary. But the more I worked with him, I grew more confident. Once I had those buzzwords and those other things under my belt, I felt better. I wasn't concerned about dialogue or anything like that, and the dialogue was all laid out in the show anyway. But yeah, so I eventually grew more confident. And I have something here. So when Valentine's plan was to publish these books, and normally what happens is the books are brought around by booksellers to bookstores. And the idea is try and convince the bookstore to buy a lot of copies. And if you can get that book in the front of the store, you're going to be assured better sales. So this is the packet that Valentine sent around to the bookstores. And it had cover art. that the bookstores could use. And it had this very cool poster. So, so the bookstores would put this poster out, and I'd have a stack of ROBOTECH novels there, and we were still not convinced that it was going to be a success, but from the very beginning, it started to sell well, and Valentine was very happy. We never toured for the books. But we at one point, such a crazy thing, we were going to do a signing at a Kmart. Because Kmart was selling books. So we were a blue light special at Kmart. And it was so funny because I don't think we sold or signed one book. We spent most of the time giving people directions to the restrooms. So that was really like a high point.
Wait, was this the Kmart days when they still had the sandwiches?
Oh yeah, it was horrible. It was horrible.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the great merchandise. That's, probably would go for a couple $1,000s on eBay. I don't know. It might be conservative or way off on that. I would think a couple thousand.
What, this?
For sure. Yeah.
I'm
I'll
giving this to you after this. I'm making this a gift.
So everyone heard that, right? Yeah. You're supposed to up to that microphone? Enough witnesses? Okay, thank you.
Brian has really done so much to keep the books alive. He really has. I say we, because Brian's still alive in my head. Great dad. So you deserve this.
Oh, I'm absolutely humbled. Yeah, what can I say? I want to argue. What are you?
eBay.
Yeah.
This was another thing I had.
Right.
Remember this? Protoculture addicts?
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Issue number 1, Protocultural Addicts. I found all this stuff in my, when I was going through all my ROBOTECH-related memorabilia. So, you guys are welcome to look at any of this stuff.
Yeah, so with Brian Daly, you mentioned his significance in some ways that perhaps not all of us were entirely aware. Maybe there was some things we can explore a little bit with him. Because what were his strengths as a novelist, as someone working on ROBOTECH or sci-fi in general?
Brian used to amaze me. First of all, eventually we started writing on the old DOS DOS computers. It's like dual floppy drives. Anybody remember those? But Brian, for a long time, just manual typewriter. And I'd watch him just sit down at that time. He would circle and circle and circle, but when he finally sat down to write, he would just bang things out so quickly. He had it all in his mind. And the amazing thing about him is if you weren't happy with one name, he gave a piece of hardware or something, he'd come up with 14 more. He just had an incredible vocabulary for science fiction, and he grew up with it. He grew up reading comics, grew up reading all the old science fiction masters, and he was a natural. He was a really, really gifted writer, and his contributions to the genre can't be understated.
Right. So I fully agree. And remember, Bill, you were a fan of Brian Daly's work before he got into ROBOTECH. He's a fan of a certain novel series for a certain other franchise from a galaxy far away, a long time ago.
Oh yes, absolutely. I was a fan of the Star Wars books. Very, very much so. But to kind of continue the narrative here a little bit, when Del Rey decided Del Rey did 12 novels for the adaptations, and then Jim and Brian did The End of the Circle, an attempt to kind of bring it all around. But then when they decided to go on with other additional novels, one of the things they started with was the period of the Malcontent Uprisings, or as Del Rey called it, the Zentradi Rebellion. And this is when Jim called me. He wanted to ask me some questions about. I was maybe 6 issues into Malcontent Uprisings. He wanted to ask me some questions about what I was doing, and he wanted our two versions to line up as much as possible.
And around what issue of Malcontent Uprisings did he call you?
I think it was about issue 6, about halfway through. I remember when you called, you identified yourself as Jack McKinney.
Really?
But I knew enough about the novelizations to know there were 2 Jack McKinneys. So I asked them flat out, am I talking to Brian Daly, or am I talking to Jim Lucchino? I was mispronouncing the name.
Uh-huh.
And we've been friends pretty much since then. We would talk over different aspects of the Robotech universe and writing in general, and I sort of contributed to the other books from this period. I think the overall title was Lost Generation.
Yeah, Lost Generation.
Yeah.
And those were mine. I didn't write those with Brian. At that, after End of the Circle, Brian wanted to work on his epic novel, Gamma, which came out after he died, sadly. So he didn't have time to do Robotech. So the last 3 novels, Zentradi Rebellion, Before the End of the Storm, is that one?
Yeah, Before the End of the Storm was the very last one.
Yeah, and Master's Gambit. Those are mine, for better or worse.
Yeah, so, right, it's, and the Marquis left, because I describe Brian Daly's writing as just impactful and, making use of prose in a way that's, it's not flowery, but it's descriptive and has an urgency to it, and gets you, puts you right in the moment of
Yeah,
something.
he was a terrific storyteller. Really was, yeah.
Yeah, and
He could tell a great joke too. And he could play spoons.
placements. Yeah, so it's I'm just gonna read one passage quickly. So just bear with me. It's a treat. Okay, so yeah, I mean, the flourishes, the touches of just realism, especially military realism, because he was in the military. Okay, the attack net on the that the squadrons had during the invasion of Earth, is essentially in the first episode of Robotech. It was adapted by Brian as such. Okay, I'm gonna read this passage here. All right, starting off with a quote from a character. Skull leader to Veritech Squadron, intercept new invader flights at Zone 428. Traffic's heavy out there, boys, so break formation, but don't leave your wingman. Roy! He sounded short of breath. Rick looked up, open-mouthed, as a Veritech find a Jolly Roger insignia bagged in alien recon craft shaped something like a flying bottle. Debris was raining everywhere. Pilots from both sides screamed in agony as they were blown to oblivion up where sky met space. And because the outfighting was so incredibly demanding physically, the attack net was loud with gasps and grunting. Dogfighters trained themselves to lock the muscles of their lower bodies, turn their legs to iron, suck their gut to their spine, anything to keep the blood up high in the head, up in the brain where it was needed, even more than in the heart. The pressure on the pilots' diaphragms was fearsome. They could draw only short, hard-won breaths. They were in high-G maneuvers. the TACnet sounded like 8 or 10 wrestling teams had been paired up off for the championship, and the trophy was Earth. I think our last night's from the perspective of humans at that moment, because we knew so little of humans. And I tell you, that's one of my favorite passages, and he does that in the very first book, and it becomes a subject of conversation between me and veterans, and I know someone at work who was a human test subject, and when I first heard that, it didn't, like, really, that's what he called you? I'm a human test subject, and then and he was being tested with high G, exercise all the time, even though he wasn't a pilot or anything, but he was in the Air Force, and no, the Navy, but land-based Navy unit. He was able to withstand 12.5 Gs, and so it's stuff like this that the rewards keep going on and on. But see, what I'd like to do is kind of touch on the use of material from Return to Macross, because it's something that I wanted to do last night. Return to Macross is a series that Bill Spangler had written, one of his series, and Jim was able to incorporate some elements from that as well, such as the Faithful as a group. See, I believe maybe a Wilbur Day, correct me if I'm wrong, certain characters you were able to incorporate from Bill's work into little excerpts here and there, maybe graphs here and there.
Yeah.
One little thing that I appreciated greatly was when I was doing Return to Macross, I wanted to set up the idea that a lot of the buildings on Macross City were modular, that they were prefab, without actually using the term prefab. I came up with the term quick form, which Jim adopted.
Right. It's funny. It's at first of all, that passage is this brilliant melding of sort of space opera and military fiction. You think, or at least I did in the beginning, well, this is just, we've got these videos, and basically we're tasked with describing what's going on, describing the action, and it seems, this should be pretty straightforward. We just have to write what we see on screen. We had the dialogue. It was not simple. It was not simple, because once you get into it, and I said this last night, it takes on a reality, and you've got to do more than just describe what's going on in the scene. You've got to work through the characters and how they're feeling about it. And Brian was terrific at that. He really had a skill for that.
Right. And now, when it comes to throwing in people's names, people you know, did you do some of that, like just a friend or two, or I don't know, maybe a relative that just out of kind of a fun thing?
Yeah, I do have a memory of creating a character that was based on either a friend or maybe a friend's son. Yeah, there was some of that.
Right.
Some of that kind of playfulness. Yeah. Maybe more in the Sentinels.
More in Sentinels?
More in the Sentinels.
Yeah, and I believe I asked you, when it came to, let's see, Lisa's mother's name. She wasn't named in the animated series, but one of the novels that Brian had written, he named Lisa's mother after someone he knew.
I'm sure he did.
Andrea, and I emailed you once and then
An old girlfriend, probably.
That's
what I'm guessing.
All right, so that's.
I think he was an old girlfriend, actually. actually. Now that yeah.
But anyway, I bring this up in part because Bill had done something a while ago for the Return of Macross series. And so yeah, I'm bringing this. It's about, by the way, it's about Ward Foger and him being able to work with Global to disrupt the operations of factions who are very anti SDF-1, you know, the destruction of it, and here is a couple pages from a certain issue 8, perhaps, Return to Macross, and okay, so Roy encounters someone who wants to kill this clone that was found on the SDF-1, and you know takes a swipe at Roy. Roy evades, but the knife man still manages to stab the clone in the chest, and then Roy starts knocking him around, and so forth. And then Roy gives him a real haymaker, or that's a correct term, I'm not a boxing guy. Anyway, it's a full page splash, right? Pow, pow, and then 2 more knocks, all right? And then security comes in, all right? And Dr. Lang says, now that you're here, one of you should attend to the attacker. The other should get Dr. Shu over here as soon as possible, along those lines. But I know Dr. Shu was definitely in that. All right, maybe paraphrasing a little bit.
Yeah,
all right,
probably.
and then although it may be too late. But yeah, so yeah. It's spelled S-H-I-U, just like on my last name. Here I am interning at this paper that Bill was writing stories for. And one day I'm coming and say, hey Bill, were you counting down the days till I discovered this in the comic? And sure enough, he wasn't. But it's like, I just got the biggest kick. And and I said to Bill a little earlier before the panel that, you know what, he may be referring to me, and yes, he had me in mind, but I was trying to tell him that you somehow saw the future, because in our family, I never thought we were going to have a doctor. Actually, never crossed my mind, to be honest. And if it did cross my mind, I knew sure as hell it wasn't going to be me. Okay, but we do have a doctor in the family, and he's in the audience, but I won't point him out to him. But thank you. It is my brother, so yeah.
It was fun to do the shout outs, and just a little extra notation that this was an international group of people here on the island. I know. Two of the big you may have would have been heading towards this, but I'm going to jump ahead a little bit maybe. 2 of the biggest areas where Jim and my work interacted is that I introduced a character called Terry Weston in a comic called Cyber Pirates. And I honestly didn't quite know what to do with it when I was there, but I did do these 4 issues of Cyber Pirates and the issue where he dies early on in Invid War. But Jim took Terry Weston and made him the protagonist of at least 2 of the Lost Generation books. You got a lot more use out of them than I ever did.
I steal wildly, any opportunity. Yes, I made use of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and the other thing was, the other thing I wanted to mention here is that I think at one point Jim establishes that Scott Bernard's mother was Emil Lang's sister. And I took that and turned that into Nina Lang, who got to be one of the major players in Return of Macross, what they call what we ended up calling the War of the Believers storyline that went 4 issues. And I introduced Scott's father, Brian Bernard. We never got really. Return of Macross got canceled shortly after that, so I was never able to make that absolutely clear that this is where it was going, but it was there for people who would recognize it.
It's really fun to work in cameras and just seeing, because ROBOTECH has been described as a generational story, and those kind of things, additional characters, additional family members being introduced, really coincides with that idea of ROBOTECH being a generational story, because essentially 3 generations are shown in the animation. And the distance apart, in years and such, there's a bond and there's an expectation. There's okay, let's see what else is going to happen with this, line of hunters or line of sterlings and stuff like that. So anyway,
No, I just wanted to also, first of all, Brian, thank you so much for bringing myself and Larry on your panel as well. We're both huge fans of both the comics and the novels. For those of you who were here last night, we talked about the interplay between the comics and the novels, and you also know, of course, that where I lived, we'd have all Robotech, so I relied on the novels to get the entire story. 5th grade, Metal Fire was the first book I wrote. So that said, I loved them so much, I would go back to certain ones. So my question before I pass it to Larry is, of the novels that you wrote, do you have any favorites, and why?
It's all a blur. I actually don't have any favorite. I really don't. They were all sort of part of this same continuity.
Tapestry.
Yeah, it was just a large tapestry. So
Then I'll ask one more question that might be, I'm going to cheat a little bit, is as far as characters or arcs that you were involved with, are there any ones that stand out or resonate with you personally?
It's funny. I like writing Exodore. I just thought it was really interesting character. I always had fun writing Exodore. I don't want to jump on in your parade, but I do want to mention the Sentinels, and I want to tell you the backstory on that one. So after we finished the 12 novels, Carl was working on the series, the Sentinels, hoping to carry the animation forward. And as all of you probably know, that project collapsed because of financing and all these other things. But we went out there and met with him again, and he gave us this. This was his plot points for the series. No scripts, just plot points. He put this book together so that he could attract financing. It never happened, and he wrote it like really quickly. And basically, he said to me when he gave me, he said, "Throw it away." I wrote it really fast, and there's great stuff in here. I mean, we ended up using so much stuff from this plot point book that we can talk about Carl tomorrow, but he really had some terrific ideas. He's really a writer himself. And the Sentinels, interesting series. Only 5 books, but by then we knew where we were going. And so it was much easier, and then finally ended the circle, which remains kind of controversial, I guess. As a lot of the things we did, I remember being attacked for changing the timeline. I don't know that I actually changed the timeline. I think I must have been going on some dates that were in the series that I was trying to write to. You could talk about that, because I know there's different chronologies.
Right, there are different chronologies, and I think a lot of it stems from the introduction of the Sentinel story, and just, I think, an urge to really, on you and Brian's part, to have the Sentinel story become Robotech and become part of the Robotech comic. So there's some revision. There's some things, that you know, retcon is something that it's just a known fact that in any kind of sustained sci-fi property, it happens a lot. And Robotech's no different in that. And, you know, so instead of having people born out in space due to the expeditionary mission and human beings having babies out in space, Scott Bernard being one of them, you know, you had retconned the timeline to just make Bernard have been born on Mars, you know, and making things such that if and when he ever reappears, he's not going to be like a 120-year-old person or something like that, right. You know. And, so it's just having. I think a lot of it stems from that, the introduction of the Sentinels, and it mentions like a 10-year period. The video itself mentions a 10-year period in which events of Macross Saga had happened, you know, and even though you might shorten up that period to perhaps the 10-year, you know, the amount of years, it was still pretty small window before things get rolling with Sentinels, and you know, with this being a generational story, by changing the timeline that you made, the deviations, all of that, you're able to have characters interact from different generations, you know, and in a very meaningful kind of way, I think.
Yeah, I think we were just trying to keep the novels consistent. So that's why we kind of fiddled with things. I didn't think it would become a serious matter that it did.
Well, I'm glad you fiddled with certain things, because there's certain things that sort of defy explanation, or at least a suitable one. So on the slide up here it says, the Zentradi way. Prisoners, yes. Hostages, no. Okay? This is something that didn't really occur to me when I was watching the animated series. Maybe it's because a combination of certain things that just, because honestly, having written a couple of things myself that nowhere got any kind of recognition, because I'm not these two gentlemen here. I know that there's a sleight of hand, there's a shell game going on when you tell a story. You know, you sort of need to distract, or you know, or have people concentrate on certain things so they don't think about too much about something else. I think the animators did a really good job distracting me from the fact that, as the novelist pointed out, the Zentradi never threatened to hold Earth hostage in order to get the SDF-1. And when I read, like, you know, an epigraph of Extor, you know, I believe it was written by you, and explaining that it's like, yeah, it's, you know, it's never been part of a way to, you know, or in our code or tradition as warrior soldiers to hold anyone or anything hostage, you know, and you Earthers, or you think that that, you know, it was just a blind spot or something, but so may I ask you, who's the more barbaric, us or you? And I think that's a great way to look at it, and to explore the warrior code of the Zentradi.
Right. Yeah.
All right, but Larry, you have something?
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask about the process of adapting the animation into novels, but you started talking about the Sentinels. And first off, that book, if you ever decide you don't want it, I will happily give it a shrine in my location, as will, I'm sure, many people out here. But just as you're talking about the Sentinels and all that you've contributed, you two gentlemen, Jim and Bill, you guys took Robotech, which was a series that, you know, by itself was amazing, and you just added so much more color to the universe, and took that seed and just expanded out. And I just, listening to you, I want to ask both of you, what is or are there elements that you have contributed to the Robotech saga and the story that you are most proud of? Whether it be any characters, any plot points, any things that you've introduced yourself that you've added into this universe.
again, I don't think that this is somewhat controversial, but I liked, or I was sort of proud of what I did with protoculture. You know, it wasn't, to me, it wasn't just a fuel. I really enjoyed fooling around with this notion of the shapings and the fact that protoculture had its own agenda, in a sense.
I guess the item two items come to mind just offhand. Giving Anatole Leonard the background that he did and the fetishes and obsessions he did, I think worked out well for the story and generating interest in it. And I'm very proud of the War of the Believers plotline in Return of the Cross. That was issues 22 through 25. Two things about Return of the Cross. My two goals is that it was to be a first contact story that takes place in the ROBOTECH universe. You didn't necessarily have to be hip deep in all the lore to enjoy Return of the Cross. At least that was the goal. And like what I was saying, I'm doing things like taking Jim's idea about Scott's mom and developing it in a direction. She started off being opposed to the research on the SDF1, but eventually comes around, and so that was a good thing, and there was something else I was going to mention, and I lost it. Maybe I'll come up with it better.
Right, so, anyway, when developing the Sentinels, what were the challenges in your mind when it came to developing the Sentinels, you and Brian? And because there were no episodes to adapt, and a lot of it depended on you and Brian just to really flesh out this whole portion of the ROBOTECH universe.
Yeah, I mean, with the Sentinels, we were writing more than adapting. We did have this massive tome, you know, of plot points, but now we were on our own to create characters, to come up with situations, some of which, you know, that we wanted to justify what Carl had done. But the Sentinels were different because they were more novels than adaptations, and that's a very different skill set.
Right. And yeah, and just the variety of situations and making it each planet distinct and keeping track of characters and so forth. Yeah, it was quite a lot, I think, I would imagine. And then there was End of the Circle. You wrote the first half, Brian wrote the second half. Brian, he did diverge from what was intended or outlined, right?
Yeah, that was a tricky one because we'd had a lot of talks about with Carl about how he wanted the series to end and how he wanted to make everything come full circle, so that at the end you could jump right back to the beginning. Brian was not a fan of that, and I mean, as a writer, you get to tweak things. So I mean, we didn't have any knockdown, drag-out fights about it. We divided the book in half. I did what I did, I set things up, and then he took it from there. I did like what he did about the space the photo generators returning.
Right.
That was really cool.
Yeah, you answered the question. That's been since the beginning.
He never liked Lancer, though, Yellow Dancer.
Yeah, I mean, what was the motivation, you think? Maybe you know, maybe you don't. I mean, granted, the new gen characters, every major character, beloved character. I mean, I would say Roy Fokker arguably may not be considered a major character of Macross, but he was a beloved character. Every beloved character in the new generation made it to the end. Was it maybe I don't know, karma catching up or whatever, or maybe not karma per se, but just the hand of fate catching up to the new gen characters that
I
might
can't answer that because I just don't know what was, what was in his mind about. I think by then he was, like I said, he was working on Gamma Law, which was a huge project, and he was just sort of on his way out.
Right.
So he just.
The Gamma Law, I think, what would you say? I know, with Brian's very first novel, in a way it comes out as military sci-fi, it always has this heavy fantasy sort of sorcery element to it. Because there's a Vietnam vet in there with ABC and, doing stuff. And, but how much do you think Robotech, his experience with Robotech influenced him on his own create our own Gamma Law books?
I don't think it had any influence. Gamma Law is set on an ocean world, and it's more military science fiction than Robotech. I think he was going back to his roots with Gamma Law. He never got to finish it. I actually finished it for him from notes that he left because he died and he hadn't finished book 4. So I ransacked his office and found all his notes for book 4 and managed to cobble an ending together for the series.
Right. And to put it in some kind of perspective, you did have one of your last discussions with him. From what I know, is that it was agreed that you would help him get that work published. Is that right?
Yeah, he was.
Before you ransacked his
he was dying of pancreatic cancer, and he was really torn up that he couldn't. He knew he wasn't going to be able to finish the series, so it was sort of a promise I made to him that I would do my best to get that out.
Right. Yeah, it's and you certainly did. I mean, you certainly got it out, and they're really good books, and they're great. Yeah. So anyway, when it comes to there's so much we say. And we only have so much time, but I do want to talk a bit more about the Tribe Rebellion, not Uprisings comic series. Now, were there things? How was it when Bill, of course Jim was so influenced, inspired by your work, even though you did portray certain things a bit differently that worked for him. Was there ever a time where, okay, I'm not sure about that, or you know what, he's got some valid reasons? I mean, between both of you, what did you think of each other's stuff as you were covering the same period?
I don't remember any real big variations. I mean, the variations I remember were either the difference between comics, which and novels, where novels didn't necessarily have to have huge amounts of action, and that was the main difference that I recall. I know.
Right.
I'm going to back up a second. The thing I forgot was in Return of the Cross. My other big goal was getting Roy Fokker right. I had just spent 2 years living with Max Sterling, and I didn't want Roy Fokker to sound too much like Max Sterling. I can't say I managed it all the time, but there were some points where I think I did manage it, particularly at the very beginning of Return to Macross, where Fokker is flying into Macross, onto Macross Island, and he's looking down at the SDF-1, and he mutters, "Hello, baby, did you miss me?" I think that's what the level that Fokker worked on. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's this great sequence. I won't go to it. Just look it up. Go through Bill Spangler and Wes Abbott's, collaboration on Return of Macross, where you see Roy Fokker's humor just come to life as he's once again in the doghouse with Claudia during this period, and he uses that Veritech in a very, very showy way because it operates like a human being who's begging, begging for forgiveness from someone he's just trying to get on a good side, and it's hilarious. But yeah, that kind of sense of humor I liked about Roy, and Bill was able to do that. When it comes to just a sort of like synchronicity, Bill had this great timeline of his own, because my web pages very much are based on these two gentlemen's timelines. Bill had focused on mountain uprisings, and Jim and Brian had an all-encompassing one. And then from Bill's timeline, Jim was able to kind of springboard off the idea of Minmay being like a propaganda, by no fault of her own, being some kind of propaganda tool for the Loreley's satellite. Was that something that you thought, okay, when I saw that, I could do something with it?
Yeah, at that point, I was really invested in ROBOTECH. I wanted to really fill in all the gaps, which, like I said last night, when I saw Bill, what he was able to do with the Southlands, and I've spent a lot of time in South America, so that was like, wow, I'm going to use that in Zen-Ronnie Rebellion. The one novel I didn't get to write, I pitched it at the end, was I wanted to do a novel that was just centered on Zor, that would tell the whole series through the eyes of Zor. He'd be the main character. And I thought that would really fill in everything, from start to finish. But by then, sales were tapering off, and I couldn't convince Valentine Newry to give me the go-ahead to write that.
Yeah, so Book of Zor. Honestly, I think, especially with Sentinels, I think, any part of the time, there are stories to be told. I mean, I remember when the Sentinels left Garuda, they also left like an REF contingent on that planet. I always thought there's a bit more that could be done with that, just keep the peace among the planets that Sentinels had visited, and just went on to the next one, and also stories about the worlds outside the local worlds, because the Empire was vast about the Invid and the Masters. So many stories we've done that, but Book of Zor, oh yeah, I would visit an alternate universe for that.
Was there a comic that dealt with Zor?
Oh yeah,
Genesis.
Those are
Well,
cool trips to,
What was that? What was that one?
Genesis Legend of Zor by the Walters.
Right. Uh-huh.
And Bill, so name at least one project that you would have loved to have done.
Well, kind of on a related issue, and this is about novels. I did do the first 10 pages of a Return to Macross novel, and I submitted it to Shelley Shapiro, who was in charge at Del Rey at the time, and I got this nice letter back saying, if I knew for sure that we were going to keep going with ROBOTECH, I'd give you the assignment, but I just don't know for sure right now. And that's pretty much where that ended, but it was a nice memo.
So real quick, what would have happened in that sequel or in that story?
Well, there were two stories. I don't know. I would have concentrated on the eternity issues and embellishing those. And something I pitched a couple of times at Harmony Gold since then was just they've come a little more relevant with lockdown and everything. Is that at one point, for some weird amount of time, like 72 seconds, something is emitted by the SDF-1, some sort of gas, and everybody panics and tries to figure out, can they keep going with the project? Who has to stay on the island? Who can't come in at the same time? That sort of thing.
That would be cool. That's the problem with long series is even best-selling series, just sales taper off at the end. People don't stick with it, whether it's Harry Potter or ROBOTECH or anything. The final books just don't do as well as the early books.
But we do have our memories. Those who are lifers like me and so many of you out in the audience. And anyway, round of applause for our guest panelists, James Messino, Bill Stanton, Andrew and Larry. And we'll open up to the audience. Who would like to ask a question? We're going to like to use the, or yeah, use that. Someone run off.
Yeah, I got a two-parter. First part, you answered the second one a little bit. First part, who prompted you or came to you to write the Sentinels? Because you said you got the book there from Carl, but then who came to you and said, write it?
Del Rey still had the license to do ROBOTECH, so, and the books were selling well, so they just wanted to keep going. They were willing to, they wanted to keep going as long as possible.
Okay.
But yeah, and so we knew it. They didn't want to bring in any other writers at that point.
Yeah, fair enough. The second one is when you're writing the Sentinels, did you guys have any guardrails or limit of advance? Did you guys have any boundaries slapped on you on writing? Because the style's pretty free, and I'll be honest, the Sentinels is my favorite of the novels. But the style is very free form, much different than the book. Did you guys have any constraints placed on you?
No, none at all.
Oh, that's awesome.
None at all. Yeah, and you feel free to take a look at this, which was Carl's contribution. So we had this to go on, but he, again, he just said disregard it, do whatever you want.
Sure.
Which is so rare in a franchise.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
When when I finally started writing Star Wars, it was like a whole different story.
Yeah, it's a different show.
Yeah.
Okay, who wants the baton of death?
By the way, everyone who asks a question will get a shirt. Brian, where are you? What's your size?
1XL.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
You already kind of answered the question about any restrictions put on you for writing the books. And I was wondering, was it the same with Star Wars, Lucasfilm, or?
No, it was not. It was with Lucasfilm. I would go out to the ranch, the Skywalker Ranch, and we would have a story conference where I would have to lay out what I wanted to do, and it would kind of have to go up the chain of command to George, who would weigh in on what was allowed and what wasn't. So it was a very different experience. It was never, they never told me what to do, but there were certain things that I, proposed that George wasn't comfortable with, or somebody wasn't comfortable with. So there were more guardrails there.
Or in particular with Dark Lord?
Not so much Dark Lord, but like Darth Plagueis, when I wrote that, I started it and they just rejected my first version, but I stuck with it, eventually convinced them. But when Lucasfilm was purchased by Disney, it became a completely different experience, because where it was very much a family affair at Skywalker Ranch, where very casual, we would all just talk through things. With Disney, I'd be sitting around with a table with like 10 people, and everybody is weighing in on every aspect of what I'm writing and telling me, no, you can't do that, or you have to. So I lasted for 2 books, maybe 2 books, and then I was gone. Yeah.
Thank you.
My question is, who are you reading?
Who am I reading?
What authors?
I really read across the board. Cormac McCarthy, and I like detective fiction. Whatever attracts my attention. I have no favorite authors that I go to all the time, but any book I read about that just piques my interest, I'm going to go after it.
Right now, I'm been trying to immerse myself in a Scottish writer named Alistair Reynolds. He's considered what they call the new space opera, and that's very exciting stuff for me.
Who are you guys reading?
Okay. reading whatever contracts they want me to work on. Very closely.
So bringing it back to ROBOTECH, I'm curious if there's any overlap, did you have any involvement with the Shadow Chronicles versus End of the Circle? I mean, most notably, I noticed, Hadon figured very prominently in End of the Circle, and then you have the Hadonites in Shadow Chronicles, and there doesn't, I don't see a connection between them.
Yeah, no, I don't think there was much. There's a lot about Hadon in Carl's plot point book. That was a fascinating character. He was like, oh, okay.
I love the character, I love the trait.
Really, it's
and
got
End of
this
the
God
Circle.
complex and is going to, yeah, fascinating character. And I thought a lot could be done there, but no, there was no real crossover.
Okay, this is perfect, okay.
When you were going around pitching ROBOTECH to like bookstores, what was your success rate, and is there any interaction that stood out to you?
Well, that wasn't me. I didn't pitch it. It was the booksellers who did it. But we managed to get a lot of titles in there. I think it was selling, like in the beginning, every book was selling about 120,000 copies, which is not bad. When you think about 12 novels and multiply that by that, you're coming up with some pretty big numbers.
Are you working on any of the franchises right now?
No, I think I'm done. I guess we gotta leave this room.
All right, once again, on behalf of Brian, do you want to close it off?
Yeah, thank you all for coming. It's been terrific, and a big learning curve for me since last night. But I hope you all had a good time. You came in yesterday or today or both. And my awesome guests, once again, Jim, Bill,